first meet Joe Justice, you know he's full of energy. You just feel it. It's kind of oozing. It's coming out of him. It is. And it's not like you don't want to wipe it away. You just want to like kind of like rub it all over. Just like feels so good, right? That's Joe Justice. You know, it was great because I knew of Joe Justice before I actually met Joe Justice. And some of us probably have experienced the same. A few years ago, I think it might have been in Dallas, I remember seeing this very cool car sitting in the lobby. And it was carbon fiber, it was black, I think. And I'm like, who in the heck would bring this car to the middle of a conference? What the heck are they thinking? Only did I find out what WikiSpeed was all about. I'm like, that's cool. To build a car that 100 miles per gallon, drives super fast. Well, who is this guy and why is he here at Agile 2012, maybe 2011? And only to find out a little bit more about Joe and how he did this using Scrum. And I thought, wow, if he can do this using Scrum, then my software problems became a whole heck of a lot easier. I could do this. So the more I learned about Joe over the years, the more I learned to appreciate the things that he was doing, only to find out that Joe is now president of Scrum at Software with Scrum Inc. So if you guys know Scrum Inc., it's Jeff Sutherland's company. And Joe now works side by side with Jeff on a number of different projects and has trained with him and now trains for him for the company. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Justice.
Stacy, thanks so much for that introduction. I don't really need to say anything anymore, right? It's covered it. I would like to take the first moment to thank Bratton Company for putting all of AgileCamp together, getting to network with so many different folks in a compact, time-focused conference that is AgileCamp has been invaluable to me. The networking I've gotten to do, the number of people I've linked in with just today is awesome. People doing Scrum. My particular piece is beyond software. So people doing Scrum in their management teams, in mergers and acquisitions, in finance, in R&D, in manufacturing. Getting to meet those folks here has been invaluable. Folks, could we give a hand for Bratton Company and AgileCamp? Thanks. Now Bratton is lucky for me, having me teach a certified Scrum Master class for software and non-software teams both, including management teams, here in the Valley Monday and Tuesday. Thanks so much. I don't know if there are any seats left, but there may be. If there are, you can do CSM, Certified Scrum Master class, Bratton, and find it. I think Stacy says there are seats. Okay, so there's an opportunity. I'd like to share what I'm learning about Scrum in hardware. And for Keith Adams, he saw a very similar version of this presentation last week in Shanghai. Keith, are you in here? I'm sorry for you. It's almost the same thing. I changed 2 slides. I'm sure I'll say some different things, but you can give away. You can say, he's about to do X. Great to have you on 2 continents in 7 days, rocking together. I'd like to share what I'm learning about Scrum applied to new product development, new product design, and manufacturing of physical goods. My background is a developer. I was a .NET developer for a decade, and then into Scrum, and then Scrum Coach, and then Scrum Transformation, and then in manufacturing. And now I'm a Scrum trainer for primarily manufacturing teams, but I do still do some work with software teams. Here's me. You might have bumped into me before, maybe online, maybe in person. I'm lucky enough to have been written up in Forbes 5 times. There are 5 articles in Forbes about me, which is humbling because I'm just some guy. And seeing your name there and then people introduce, hi, I'm the CTO of IBM. That happened to me last week. I've heard all about you. And you're kidding me. I'm just some guy. But, you know, they'll read that and think it's a big deal. Thanks, world. I'm lucky enough to have gotten to guest lecture in Cambridge, MIT and Oxford University in England. In England, I got to work with companies doing Scrum in 3D printing human organ tissues to enable test-driven development in big pharma. They're like, how does that work on liver cells? Let's find out right now. And it was pretty awesome, the Scrum deployed there. I'm lucky enough to have gotten to do a TEDx talk. That's on my hobby company that I own. I own a automotive manufacturing business. We produce cars in 23 countries now. It's either a very serious hobby or a very casual multinational manufacturing company. It's in between. And TEDx is like the feeder series to TED. It's like the Little Leagues. They had me do a talk there, and you can invest 9 minutes of your life to learn about Scrum and automotive there. I'll mostly talk about other companies, clients I'm working with through Scrum Inc. on Scrum and hardware. The Discovery Channel has done a mini documentary on me. That's terrifying to say, because like people then expect a lot out of you, and I'm just some guy. I did author the Extreme Manufacturing Methods. It's the best I've learned so far when a Scrum team produces physical goods. What are the common practices they seem to develop through their retrospectives? What do they land on? And those have been cataloged as Extreme Manufacturing. The Wikipedia article on it is very good. I didn't write it. It's awesome. That said, one day I probably will write a book, but I'll just point everyone to Wikipedia anyway, because it's easier to get there. Deloitte Center for the Edge Consulting sent a team of consultants into one of my micro factories from this hobby car company that I own. And they spent 3 weeks with us, so 3 sprints. And each sprint, we make an entire new model of the cars and sell them. We're the only car company in the world to do that, to be on 1 week model cycles. Design, build, test, deploy. And they spent 3 weeks with us, and they actually built some of our cars with us in Team Wikispeed. And then they went off to write an article. And I was terrified. I had no idea what they were going to write. They published it in CNN Money Fortune, and the title was How Every Company Should Train Their Staff. And I was deeply relieved. It wasn't bunch of agile hacks produce unsafe cars. It was how every company should train their staff. So I was very lucky. Yeah, I was underneath. Here's the context of a recent customer. On the right-hand side is the Lockheed Martin F-35. It's currently vaporware. Procurement officials in Great Britain have called it the humanity's greatest and most expensive white elephant. It's $143 billion over budget as of last year, which was the last time they were required to divest their over budgetness. It's been delayed until 2022 now. The cost per plane in 1 year went from $273 million to $337 million. Congress says we're not sure we even want it anymore. One, we were expecting to fly these things a decade ago. That's when we purchased them. And second, now it costs much more than we thought we were going to have to purchase, and the cost of maintenance is projected to be higher. We don't even know if we want them. Now, hard for Lockheed Martin is the Saab Gripen. The Saab Gripen is, unfortunately for Lockheed Martin, very often compared to the F-35. Here's why. Both of these fighter jets are called Generation 4 multi-role joint strike fighters. So they have the same role classification. Both projects started the same quarter of the same year. So they're frequently compared. They're the same type of asset. Global militaries consider purchasing either plane for the same reason, and projects start at the same time. The cumulative program cost was $15 billion. That's 1/10 of the budget overrun of this plane. They release a new iteration of all systems every 6 months. They run all Scrum end-to-end through Saab Defense. They have daily stand-up in the morning starting at 7. The last Scrum of Scrums is completed by 9 o'clock. Any impediments that haven't been pulled by a product owner are handed to senior leadership. It's senior leadership's job to remove those impediments before the end of the day and demo it back to the teams. As a result, they fly new planes every week internally in Saab Defense. They deploy to simulations every day. They have pilots co-located with the development teams, hardware and software, and they ship new jets every 6 months. Not just with new targeting and communication software, although they do, but with more powerful engines, different weapons mounts, different tactical role features like mid-air refueling was added in Generation 2, and they're in Generation 4 now. So they're 4 releases ahead of a plane that hasn't even been released. The cost per plane is $43 million, and it's going down each release. And according to Jane's Aviation Weekly, the Gripen is the world's most cost-effective military aircraft. Lockheed Martin called Scrum Inc. and said, "It's so embarrassing, we're now a meme." And this isn't even updated to how bad it is. It's now until 2022. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization said, $1.5 trillion? That's enough to feed every hungry person on the planet for 50 years. And Congress said, maybe we're doing it wrong. So Lockheed Martin said, we need to completely rethink what we're doing. This waterfall development process that we have, where we design the perfect game-changing product and then deliver, is only delivering 1 time out of 10. We might need to do something else. I don't actually get to talk about what Scrum Inc. did with Lockheed Martin. But they put it on the daily news here in Silicon Valley, and it played in prime time every night for a week, so it's probably okay for me to show that.
Some Silicon Valley engineers who work on top-secret military space systems got to test their problem-solving skills today. Lockheed Martin challenged them to a down-to-earth project, building a car in just 1 day. ABC 7 News business and technology reporter David Louie is live in Sunnyvale. David, did they make their deadline?
They did make their deadline precisely 9 hours later. You know, engineers are always fond of saying they're up for a good challenge, and the executives here at Lockheed Martin decided it might be good to help them push their thinking through, to think outside the box. And they found the perfect vehicle to do it, this car.
1, 2, 3.
Lifting off a tarp isn't quite as dramatic as a spacecraft liftoff, which is a routine part of their work. But these engineers couldn't be happier about how this day-long project ended.
My name is Amanda Fu, and I'm a rocket design manager here at Lockheed Martin.
And what do you know about building a car?
0.
That's how these 200 engineers started out their day. Their goal, to build a car rated to go 100 miles per gallon. It was a team-building exercise by Lockheed Martin to inspire its engineers to rev up their creative juices and to get them to be better problem solvers.
It means that failure is not an option. They have to very quickly pick up the task, find their way through it, make sure they're doing it correctly the first time, because there's really no time to cycle back through it. And even in the normal products we build that take much longer, that's still a truism that they have to live with.
This wasn't designed to be a simple assembly process. Curves were thrown in to create challenges.
We have about 4 inches of error in the drive assembly, so we have to adjust where the tires are, adjust where the wheel assemblies are, and adjust ultimately where the engine is.
Easy to fix?
Easy-ish. Easier than the body.
The car itself is a prototype created by Wikispeed, an organization working toward a highly efficient commuter car. A buyer has paid $25,000 to take this team-assembled vehicle home. And by working all day as a team, Lockheed Martin employees hope to walk away with new skills to use in their daily work.
My group does a lot of supply chain strategy, so if we can see how things are built, see what the parts do that our group is buying, it really helps us understand how we contribute to the organization.
In Sunnyvale, David Louie, ABC 7 News.
So they're completely rebooting the company, or that you could infer that from this video. Training their teams. Folks, would anyone care to point out the least agile part of that news segment? Would someone say it? Yeah, the guy in the suit. Failure is not an option. What happened is we were doing this in this main atrium on Lockheed Martin's campus here, and it's beautiful, big glass building, probably cost taxpayers a lot of money. And the camera crew there from ABC 7 says, oh, there's someone in a suit. Let's make sure we get footage of someone in a suit. And it's exactly the problem with the F-35. The waterfall mindset. I mean, you feel a little dirty inside listening to it. in an Agile conference. He's saying, and they've got to get it right the first time. And you're like, who are you? And that may or may not be the problem. That's exactly what the Scrum teams are running into inside the. Okay. So to codify the best I'm learning of what Scrum in hardware is from teams doing it, is it sure looks like the Scrum part is exactly Scrum, the same Scrum you guys already know, the best I can tell. The same 3 roles, they count on each other to do the same 3 things. They have the same 5 meetings and the same 3 outputs. It looks like no matter what the team is doing, Scrum seems to be the same for teamwork, the best I can tell. Morale is a multiplier for velocity. Well, that's a key Agile concept anyway, and that applies across domain, obviously. Whether we're building cruise missiles, battleships, radar systems, cars, or great software, focusing on the impediments to team morale drive velocity across the delivery as well. The XP engineering practices, this seems to be what new domains need to know the most. And for those of you considering coaching Scrum teams in other domains in your company or in entirely non-software based companies, this is, I think, the only piece you would need to learn, and it's super straightforward. Here's what it is. I looked at the XP practices and said, well, what would this look like if we were building a car instead of great software? And I translated each of the XP practices, and I called it extreme manufacturing. That's it. Well, and then I did learn through retrospectives a few more things, like always make sure there's food and beer. So there's a few more items. And by the way, that really helps. Raytheon, they're like, really? Vodka bar and fried shrimp and grilled shrimp? And by that I mean that's what they were doing. And that team went a lot faster. Their morale was great. But by looking at each of the XP practices and saying, well, user stories, what do user stories look like in cruise missiles? Well, it's actually very similar. Okay, how about pairing and swarming? Perfect analogy. Instead of having 2 folks, 2 keyboards, 2 mice, 2 monitors, and 1 computer, we make sure we have 2 sets of every size wrench. In fact, we make sure we have 3, so that way we can call for a swarm and someone can help without taking a tool from someone, from the pair that got stuck. That way it helps protect morale. Because nothing sucks more when a pair's stuck on a task, and they don't even have to say it. You see it, their shoulders slump, and the team calls for a swarm, because we work in large scrum rooms with multiple teams of 4 to 5 people, sometimes a couple hundred at a time, because you're building big things, right? Someone will slump and everyone will swarm. Well, nothing is worse than when you take the tool out of someone's hand and say, let me show you how to do it. So instead, you get the other one like that, and it goes faster. So what are the XP practices for your domain? That just takes a little bit of mental stretching, but it's exactly the XP practices. Or you'll invent them by observing the retrospectives. And the shorter your sprints, the faster you'll develop the set. So what is extreme accounting? I don't know. I'm excited to find out. All of this is based on something most of us already know, but maybe not. Object-oriented architecture. This is my theory, what enabled agility in software in the first place. And a lot of other domains had this before and lost it. They didn't think they needed it anymore. Here's what I mean. If we take a software program from the 1970s, and let's say it's 1 million lines of code long, and it's procedural. 1 line of code executes the next, the next, the next. And there's if-thens and go-tos, but we have global variables, and they're executing 1 line of code, the next, the next, the next. Well, if you hand that to a team of 4 to 5 people and say, change the login function, I want to see it Friday, it would be difficult. That's why software programs were 3 to 5 year endeavors, because we had to vet all the global variables, and the login function, there's no concept of a function. It's distributed across this whole line, a whole segment of code, well, this entire code base. Well, once we had object-oriented architecture, there's a login function, and it has known inputs and known outputs. And if you don't change the inputs and outputs, you can change just that section in an hour and test it against the rest of the system. add in automated regression tests, and you don't have to test the rest of the system other than the automated coverage most of the time, and you can make changes in short amounts of time. And in my opinion, that's what created the opportunity for Agile to exist, because now you could make meaningful changes in less than a week. Well, what's that look like in hardware? Object-oriented architecture is modular components with contract-first design. This enables design patterns and reuse and inheritance. When this happens, factories choose, in my experience so far, to, instead of optimizing for making the same thing cheaply, they optimize for making something cooler than what they know how to make now next week. So they optimize for change. And they end up making it even less cheaply too, or even more cheaply too. So it drives down cost anyway. I'll show you what that looks like, because there's words that may sound like a good idea, but what is it actually? Here is a milling machine that may or may not be in Toyota Motor Company, and it costs $100 million. And its job is to take a block of steel and machine out something the shape of a car door. So then when they pull sheet steel over it on the mass manufacturing assembly line and press it on, it's called a stamped steel die, it makes the shape of a door. Well, this machine costs so much, and its capacity is 1 die per day, one of these door-sized things, that's the primary bottleneck in the manufacturing process. So if you designed a more ergonomic or even more safe door tomorrow, they wouldn't want to deploy it. Not yet, because they'd want to amortize the cost of the first door mold before making another one, and because there's a bottleneck to get into this very expensive machine. Here's a machine that's $2,000. Its capacity is also 1 die per day. In the last 10 years, the intersection between fast product development and the maker movement has made all of the tools for mass production available for the price that an individual could do in a storage unit. And it's taken the idea of a cottage industry and made it a mass manufacturing capable industry. So this machine has the same capacity, same resolution, and similar durability to this machine at a significantly lower price. So we have this as part of our context, which says scale as a competitive advantage is no longer the name of the game, and the cost to entry is now really small. So every company needs to be concerned about what would a startup do for their business. That creates the appetite for what does Agile look like in our business. That's a lot of the reason I'm getting calls. Lean is essential, but here's the challenge I'm bumping into. Companies that have fantastic lean implementations where very, very little waste is happening across their mass manufacturing assembly line, their pace of new product development is getting longer and longer and longer and longer, because lean eliminates waste. It eliminates variance. That's its job, and it's really good at it. The problem is innovation is variance. And the way most folks are implementing lean, it's eliminating innovation as well. The Lean Enterprise Institute, the folks who wrote the book on lean, those people, they came to my garage and we got drunk and built a car. It was awesome. They drew a yin-yang on the board and said, in the United States, we only talk about half of lean. They said, that's this half of the yin-yang. That's mass manufacturing. And this dot in the yin-yang, those are scrum teams in our opinion. The fast ones are always these small, self-organizing, collaborative, cross-functional, dedicated, co-located teams. And they're building new product using lean principles. The other half of the yin-yang that we talk about in Japanese all the time, but not much in the Americas, is new product development. And that's a scrum team using lean principles. They said it's the same thing, the yin and yang. They naturally complete the picture. What I'd like to say for folks in this room who might be considering scrumming manufacturing or any group outside software is lean is definitely not the enemy, the best I can tell, when I'm deploying this in factories. Well, they're deploying it when I'm helping and sharing what I'm learning. Lean is a necessary prerequisite, and Scrum is the other half that enables new product development to go really fast too. And they work together as natural complements. I'll go through each of these in a moment. Here is a Scrum team on a factory floor. They were a lean team, and they already had something like a daily stand-up meeting at the beginning of the shift. They called it their pre-shift meeting. And they have a Kanban board. Kanban in Japanese is a billboard, the large sign that you'd have by the side of a highway. That would be a Kanban. So they have a Kanban, but it has painted lines on it and magnets for customer orders flowing across. We're in a room of Agilists. What's the problem with that? Yeah, you can't change it easily. And that was their problem. They're saying all we can do is optimize the flow across these painted lines without calling for a Kaizen event where management comes in and does it for us. We're a totally unempowered team. And this, I see this all the time. Kaizen is imposed on the team, continuous improvement, as opposed to retrospective emerging from the team. So they've replaced this with a whiteboard flowing sticky notes across, and their sticky notes started including not just order fulfillment, but process improvement. How do we do continuous Kaizen? And they added a sprint cadence, so they had a rhythm and they knew when change was coming, so it wasn't freaking them out, because that happens when change is erratic and sporadic, or being done to them. And they added a Scrum Master, and they started running retrospectives to power their Kaizen events. And at the pre-shift daily Scrum, they'd bubble up impediments and start to coordinate across other assembly lines for the idea of a scrum of scrums across the entire factory. This company blew up Motorola. This is Tate Communications in Christchurch, New Zealand, a teeny tiny competitor to Motorola, and they snatched market share from Motorola by scrumming. Here's Volvo's object-oriented architecture. So this is absolutely happening in mainstream big stuff now. They said, instead of perfect architecture up front, what are the known stable interfaces between pieces of our cars? Let's make those connections first, the contract. Then we can change any piece very cheaply at almost any time. And they did something that I thought was so cool when I saw it. And I tweeted back to them and said, this is amazing. They tweeted back saying, we're very proud of it. Thank you. Is this piece they mark as fixed. The area from the front wheel center to just behind the pedals, they say is fixed. Now inside Volvo, it's not actually fixed. There's a dollar value on it. And they say, product owners, if this card in your backlog that requires changing this has a higher estimated value than X, it's okay to change it. Your business case is valid. So that's completely transparent. They can go as fast as they want. They use this same architecture for single-seat prototypes, 7-seat SUVs, 18-seat passenger vehicles, and even some light commercial and sedans and coupes. Same architecture. By defining the interfaces first, they're able to change quickly. They call this their scalable product architecture, and all Volvos are built on it as of now. Here's the suspension modules. This comes from my car company. These all have a known stable interface of how they mount to the car, so we can swap these in about the time it takes to change a tire and put tank treads or articulated spider legs. It makes it cheap to run experiments, about as cheap as it is in software. Now there is an additional cost. You have materials. In a software project, you have cost of servers, cost of the pipe, cost of data storage and rapid rollback. Well, in hardware, you have costs of aluminum, carbon fiber, polycarbonate. It's really similar, actually. And again, the best I can tell, Scrum didn't change at all, translated across these domains. So these are modules not of code, but of suspension, and they get shipped out. And you can hot ship these to existing customers. We do. Long supply chains are the enemy of agility. If we contract work out to a dev team in another time zone, it's more expensive to communicate, right? Now there's some really good tools to minimize that pain, but it's still slower. There are only 2 recorded companies that were audited and have metrics that were audited that showed almost as fast as co-located Scrum teams all in one room. It was Circe Dynex and Exebia when they were working on Dutch Rail. It's the only 2 times it's ever happened under audit, ever. And they weren't as fast as the co-located Scrum teams. They were almost as fast. Well, the same seems to be true in supply chain. If you have an 8-month lead time for certain materials coming into your factory, and the product owners want to make a change that no longer requires that material, you have 8 months of the old wrong thing arriving that you have to either resell or keep making the old design. You're disincented from innovating. Shortening your supply chains enables agility. This is called supply chain agility. This is a science. This is a thing. That's the whole premise. So now you guys are experts on supply chain agility. Please go out and coach on it and help save some companies. Also, your feedback cycle is only as fast as your supply chain. Because if your supply chain dictates how long it is between making significant changes in your product or service, that's really your sprint length. We have a lot of companies on 3 to 5 year sprints. I'm an environmentalist. This is why I get really pumped about Scrum and hardware. I don't know if our environment can last when companies are only course correcting on 3 to 5 year sprints. I think we might have to get down to 1 week sprints across hardware industry if we're actually going to have a viable planet for humans. One guy's opinion, but that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. So please help Scrum companies. Yeah, right? Many companies will install casters or sliders on every machine in their assembly line because the start of each sprint, the production team is potentially building something different than they were last sprint. And sprints are by definition shorter than a month. 1 calendar month is the maximum length of time we can call a sprint and still say it's Scrum. So they'll put them on casters and they'll slide machines in and out. And before, when a company would hire a consultant to come in to reprogram machines to make the new product, because it's only changing every 3 to 5 years, now everyone in the team cross-trains and they become more valuable. Their skill set goes up. Okay, top excuses from whining companies. Also called top reasons companies say they can't do this. Our product is too complicated to not plan everything meticulously in advance. We hear this in software too, and we know that interestingly, Agile is the method to deal with highly complex deliveries and reduce risk by not planning everything meticulously in advance, instead by iterating our plan. So that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Agile is. Second, our quality expectations are too high to not follow a documented and unvarying plan. Same thing we hear in software. And again, that's merely they don't yet know Agile. We need to put those people through a certified Scrum Master class and they can come out on the other side reborn. Like Nicola talked about. Thank you. We have already made large investments in fixed machinery and tooling. Related to, our product design is too tightly coupled to iterate modules without changing the entire design. We've already designed the whole thing and we can change it only in whole. We've already built the solution. It's all procedural code. That's a lot of technical debt. These are real impediments. The solution to them that I've seen so far is calculating cost of delay. That's what John Deere did. They said, well, what would it cost if Caterpillar scrummed this year and they started releasing new tractors on a yearly cadence? Oh, wow, they said, we can afford. That cost is greater than the cost to change the way we do our internal practices. Cost of delay is what justified that one. So for you guys, as I hope, Scrum coaches, Scrum trainers, Scrum evangelists to now hardware companies, that's your ammunition, is what would it cost if one of your competitors did it before you. Now we have a third, much more tricky class of complaint. Our vendors are not agile enough to support this approach. Well, that was true in software too. This binary library is coming from this other group, and they're on waterfall cadence every 18 months. Well, yeah, it was a problem. The companies that didn't change are no longer around. Okay. Key steps of the manufacturing process require too long a lead time to fit into short sprints. Well, those two are valid. So I'd like to talk about the best I've seen addressing those last two, because all of the above are already addressed. So let's dive into these last two. First, what if the part that your company or your new partner company is making has plastics? Protomold was created by a former exec at HP. The story I've heard, and who here is from HP? I sat at lunch with one person, 1, 2, that's when I sat with lunch with 3, 4, at least 4 of you are admitting it. And we have some other HP veterans, I bet, in the room too. So the story I've heard, survivors, it depends which group you're in and when, is this exec at HP was saying our software is getting faster and faster in some areas. How come when we want to make a new housing for this new commercial printer, and that was the example I was told, that takes 18 months lead time and $10 million? This is ridiculous. So the story I heard is he then quit HP, founded Protomold here in the Valley, and said our entire business plan is making plastic cases, they now do metallics too, in the same day for less than $10,000. And they completely blew up the industry. Now there are many companies doing this, but Protomold is one. They can make same day parts or molds to make more parts the size of a car door or greater. But for this part of the talk, I'll use an example of the size of a car door for $10,000. So if you're being told by your company, we can't iterate, we have plastic parts, like I was when I was working with the company that made the hand dryer in the men's room here. They said the plastic outside of the hand dryer, that's a 3-month lead time, $1 million mold. And I said, that's stupid, find better suppliers. And they did, and now they're on 1-week sprints. Circuit boards, well, our robots, we have specialized electronics, and that takes 3 to 4 years to develop, and usually they're buggy, so another 2 years on that. Well, Rush PCB is one of the many, many, many companies that will supply up to 8-layer circuit boards same day. They'll get them to you in 5 days for $10. Same day as Rush, it's $100. These are powerful enough to navigate a cruise missile. I'm not allowed to say how I know. Even cooler than that is Rugged Circuits. They make the Ruggedduino. It's $40. It's available in stock same day. Well, how come the guy at the front of the room just said it's even cooler, but it costs 4 times as much? It's $40. Because when you make this one, who knows how to write software for it? Nobody. You just made it. What test framework is written that runs on your custom PCB? You have to make an extension yourself. This one already has a Jenkins adaptation. This one already has visual source control. This one has hundreds of thousands of people that already know how to use it because it's Arduino compatible. So it's an Arduino compatible circuit board. That means it's about the size, well, it is about the size of a pack of playing cards. It's $40. It's powerful enough to navigate a cruise missile. And there are hundreds of thousands of people that already know how to use it, and it ties into Jenkins. So for you folks that are doing continuous integration, gated check-in, automated test coverage coaching, you can now do this in electronics and hardware. Just say get Ruggedduino or an Arduino compatible chip, and you're set. And you already have turnkey development teams to bring in right off TaskRabbit. Here's a company that's using this entire ecosystem end to end. They're in Chandler, Arizona. This is one of the products they make, the Local Motors Rally Fighter. So they make entire vehicles. They make a lot of different stuff, though. Here's how they work. They have a community that's free to join, and folks submit ideas. So you say, I want to build this or something. You submit your idea. Then their community of people that buy products from Local Motors votes up or votes down, saying if they want it or not. Then, if it gets enough votes, Local Motors builds one. They invest in building one. And if the community says, yeah, we still want it, let's buy them, they do micro manufacture, and they do distributed manufacturing using, it's called massively concurrent parallel manufacturing. It flows more like the way hyperthreading flows in modern chips than anything like Henry Ford thought of. And it's the most robust and least expensive manufacturing method. Then they market and sell it and send a portion of the proceeds back to whoever submitted the ideas. And they do this in sprints. Here's Tesla by comparison, right here in the valley or darn close to it. They're super agile in my assessment, but they don't have any Scrum. Here's what I mean. The Tesla Model S door, I'll use doors as the example, looks pretty similar. In fact, it's identical to how it looked 3 years ago. Here's why. This is their machine making the pressings for the doors and all the body panels and the floor pans and other stuff. Well, it uses those stamped steel dies like Toyota does, those $10 million chunks of steel. And until they've made $10 million profit, they don't want to change that part, even if someone came up with a much more elegant design. Their cost to make change is really high. They don't have a regular cadence of change. Here's the coolest solution I've seen so far. This is called 3D green sand casting. Green sand casting has been around for 60 years, more than that. 3D green sand casting is brand new. It's 3D printing, and it prints epoxy glue with green sand in it. And it stacks it up. So it goes from green sand to this 3D printing. Then they pour aluminum in it, and they pull out a working jet engine. They can do volume metal casting same week. It's the fastest, cheapest quality metal tooling I've seen. If Tesla used this, the Tesla Model S door could look different every week for about $100 for their manufacturing cost. I'd like to see that happen. There's no reason for mass volume manufacturing to not be in 1 week sprints. Even cooler than that, this machine fits in the scrum room, and it's about as loud as a laser printer. So you set it in the office setting. It's $8,000 a tool. It's the Roland MDX 440. You put a slab of aluminum in it, or steel, but I prefer aluminum because it's lighter, cheaper, easier to recycle, has lower melting temperature for recycling, so it uses less energy. You press print, and it cuts out everything that's not door. And you stack 20 of these outputs together, and you have the entire door. So you can do that in the office setting. If you want to do it all at once, not 20 parts, you can use what's called a vertical milling machine. This one happens to be made by Akuma. It's $120,000 for this machine. It will cut out a whole door at a time, but it's louder. So you usually need to put a sound box around it if it's in an office setting, or have it over in an industrial area. And the cost of maintenance is higher. It's durable, but when something goes wrong, you have to ship it out by freight to be fixed. So I recommend these guys. You just have Scrum teams that look just like they're writing software. They're just making car doors. Even cooler than that, we can do it in composites from the first go-around. Here's the Globe Rapid Clave. It is the tool that makes the current generation Chevy Corvette hoods. It's 9 minutes part to part with no additional cost to make change, no matter what the change is between part. So Chevy, if they had a recall on their hoods, the next hood off the line can include the enhancement at no additional cost. So that is agile in manufacturing. You've reduced the cost to make change, and it's happening. I got to go to the plant, Globe, where they make these machines. This thing is 3 stories high. It is $1 million. That's the cost of a lean cell on a manufacturing line. That said, it's a fully agile lean cell for composites. Even cooler than that, just print the whole thing. Here's what Local Motors is doing now. They're saying our microfactories are cool, but what if we had one production cell that could just print the whole car? At a trade show I was attending, for manufacturing, they printed an entire car. They did walk in with copper windings for the motor. They printed everything else, including the wheels, or almost everything else, and they drove the car out. It took them 2 days. Their cost to make change from car to car is nothing. When they want to scale up, they just put 2 of these next to each other, then 3, then 10, then 40. That's massively parallel concurrent manufacturing. Instead of flow from piece to piece, you have completely autonomous Scrum units in parallel. It scales more like hyper-threading. Here's Mission Bell Winery in Madeira, so they're near here. They're a 60-acre facility, not the vineyards, that's the buildings. They're one of the largest wineries in the world. They are the largest exporter of champagne in the world. They export more than the entire Champagne region of France and all of its wineries. And yes, they are allowed to call it champagne. They are grandfathered in. Here's the head of the winery, Eric Martella, and he's holding a fortune cookie that says, "You will soon make a change at work." And he's laughing to himself because this is day 1 of him deploying Scrum across the entire winery, one of the world's largest wineries. Here's how he did it. He hosted a really nice lunch for everyone in the winery, and he said it's mandatory for all of his direct reports, and anyone is encouraged to come, and there's really good food for everybody. During the lunch, he said, your only requirement to be here, and there is one, is I need you to write on sticky notes any goal or mission you have in your mind that you think might make this a better and happier place to work. The room was about this size, and 3 walls filled up. This is a picture of just one of the areas on all the walls from everybody posting sticky notes. So at the end of the lunch, Eric had a whole bunch of ideas for what might make the winery a better and happier place to work. But he wasn't done. He then went through the whole room and made a single prioritized list. This is Scrum at the top. So here's the head of the winery, and he's Scrum. He's saying, I'll be the first product owner, and I'll have a Scrum team of 4 of my direct reports. The fastest Scrum teams we know of right now, this was indexed by Harvard, 4 to 5 people. It's smaller than we used to think. If you read a book on Scrum that was published 6 or more years ago, they'll still talk about teams as big as 11, 7 plus or minus 2, and some of them will say that's not counting the product owner and Scrum Master, so possibly as big as 11. That's slower now statistically. The data's in. 4.6, including the product owner and Scrum Master, are far and away the faster teams. So he then creates a Scrum team of his direct reports, and they have a single prioritized backlog for the entire winery. First is, let's improve the capacity of daily production. Second is, let's achieve this new certification called Safe Quality Foods. Their foods already meet all the current certs. This is a next gen one. They think if they achieve this, they can have even more distribution channels, sell even more wine, and down the list. And he says, we're going to do only one at a time until it's done. We're going to prioritize and focus because he's seen Weinberg's table of project context switching loss. Okay, so now Eric says, who here knows something about making champagne? And a whole group of people gets up and he says, can you go over by this wall and make a value stream map of every step to make a new type of champagne, from exploring the idea, the concept, all the way through delivering it to stores where people are going to buy it? And they said, sure. And they made a value stream map in about 7 minutes. And he said, where are 4 to 5 of you who would like to make this value stream map better and have more fun doing it? And 4 to 5 people self-identified. They launched Team Bubbles. And they were a Scrum team. As a Scrum team, they needed to either have someone in the team who knew how to do every step or have the cell phone number of someone who knew how to do any missing step. They're a friend of the team. Because 4 to 5 people running all of cellar operations, all of polyphenolics, all of bottling maintenance, all of plant maintenance, all of pumping in tanks, all of venting. It's hard to do. But they had 4 to 5 people who care about it and know the whole landscape, and they have cell phone numbers of everyone for any skill they're missing. Now that they've been doing this several sprints, 4 to 5 of them can do every step of the champagne process. They now ship 6 million more bottles of champagne than before, and they've gone down to 0 ISO 9001 defects. According to their manufacturing manager, they say morale has gone up, but they don't have a solid index. But he says it's a much happier winery, and he's totally enthusiastic. So we have anecdotal evidence that they also say it's happier. So they launched the champagne team. Here's their Scrum room. Not bad. Here's also their Scrum room. And here's their Scrum room. For folks in the room who are thinking about doing Scrum in another domain, first, do it. Please save the planet. Secondly, it's exactly the same as what you're doing now, just the Scrum room you're in might be different. That's it. Same Scrum. If you can coach the 5 Scrum meetings, the 3 Scrum roles, and the 3 outputs of Scrum, you can coach Scrum in any industry. I'd encourage you to then take a hard look at the XP practices and say, what would those maybe look like in this new domain? And then pay really close attention during retrospectives as it's all refined. But please save every industry. Here's their information radiator. It has things like gallons of wine loss, whereas one of yours in software might say cyclomatic complexity. Same thing, and they know their metrics, so ask them and we'll all get smarter together. 6 million more bottles of wine shipped, 0 ISO 9001 defects, higher workplace happiness according to their manufacturing manager. And they publish all these on the wall where the team doing the work can see them. So Team Bubbles, it's right by Team Bubbles. And everyone else in the company can see them. That helps create shared ownership of the solution, just like we all do in software. Here's UTOS. They make the fuel injectors for jet engines, military and commercial. This is the owner of the factory and head of the PMO, and they're taking all the good ideas of missions to improve UTOS and making a single prioritized list. Without this, we have product owners being asked for updates for multiple projects at the same time, and they start doing horrible, evil, slow crap, like assigning people to more than one team and matrixing. The way to solve this seems to be a single prioritized list at the top level. Now, it still doesn't make it easier for the top level product owner because the marketplace isn't prioritizing and focusing. They're still asking for competing priorities all the time. But that's why a CEO is a good, hard job. And if they prioritize and focus, it then becomes easy for everyone else in the organization to prioritize and focus and avoid Weinberg's table of project context switching loss. Here's KVH Satellite Systems. They're the world's largest provider of maritime internet. So on cruise ships, they'll provide streaming movies. On freighters, they'll provide logistics plans. Here's their product owner function launching. And thanks Keith Adams for your brilliant talk earlier in AgileCamp on communities of practice and Kabbalahs. They're launching their community of practice of product owners to say across all of KVH, how can one product owner's impediment that's solved help other product owners? Do they have similar types of impediments? Now, if we were looking for radical breakthrough innovation that's irrespective of the existing establishment, where would we look first? You're right, illegal street racing. You'd be completely correct. Here's this gentleman that now owns two incredibly profitable companies, Rocket Bunny and Liberty Walk, hilariously named. And here's how he invented his companies. He said, I'd like to be a supplier to Ferrari and Lamborghini. They've never heard of me. I'm an illegal street racer in Japan. But I would like them to buy products from me directly. So he takes a 3D scanner and he scans here a Ferrari 458 Italia, but the rest of the example I'll use a Lamborghini Aventador. So he scans a Lamborghini Aventador and he CADs the changes he wants to make to it. He draws them on his computer. And in this case, they're exterior changes, but he does all types of parts now. And he posts it on Facebook later that day, and people like it or not. And based on the number of likes, he decides which design to build. That's it. Facebook likes. Then he cuts it out in foam. He has a machine, a CNC machine that cuts it out in foam. And he lays it up in carbon fiber the next day. And he puts it on a Lamborghini Aventador. I imagine getting someone to lend him one the first time was really difficult. And then he races it and publishes the YouTube video of this thing racing in downtown Tokyo, totally illegally at 200 miles an hour. And it gets a whole bunch of Facebook likes. And then he polishes it up. Because, see, it's not even painted. And he races it because he wants to fail fast if no one likes it. Then he paints it. And here he sells. I'm not sure if you can easily see it. But here's 3 Aventadors in a line. And they're all sold. This is 1 week after him having the good idea. He now is a direct supplier to Lamborghini and Ferrari on 1 week iterations of pretty much any part they want. John Deere saw this and said, the head of supply chain management said, how long does it take us for us to get a new cab for one of our tractors from our cab supplier? It wasn't a week. And when I said the punchline, the guy almost cried. It was a moment. Suppliers are doing this now. If your suppliers can't do this, find different suppliers. Here's the takeaways, the best I've seen so far on using Scrum in every domain, and particularly hardware. As market responsiveness becomes more important than scale, adding agility to manufacturing is essential. Scrum enhances Lean with agile practices to the physical R&D and manufacturing world. 4 practices should be of interest to manufacturing companies. First, the existing Lean cells are perfect candidates to relaunch as Scrum teams. Send them to a 2-day training, have a team launch thereafter, and they're already rolling. Then contract first design, shorten supply chains, and keep the line flexible. All of the reasons you think you can't do this have already been solved. Companies are starting to leverage agile manufacturing to succeed in the market. Is the competitor to your client one of them? Folks, with that, are there any questions about how you might save the planet by making shorter sprint cycles in more domains? Well, first, thank you folks very much. I appreciate you letting me come. Yes, oh, thank you. And there is a question. Go ahead.
So with Mercedes, one of the criticisms was when you looked for a spare part, you actually had to specify the specific automobile because the part might have changed. While buying in, it does strike me that the spare parts and follow-up maintenance is no small task.
So where's the question?
So the question is, how do you handle that?
Okay. Yeah, I was working with a company saying, we don't want, I'll just name them, Autodesk. And they were saying, although they've changed their tune, we don't want more frequent releases. Our customers hate it when we make a new release. They said, when we release a new version of Autodesk, our customers then have to resave all their CAD files to be opened in the new version, and they're no longer compatible with the rest of their supply chain. And I said, well, there's your problem. It's not they don't want updates, it's that you've made updates broken. There's two ways to look at profitability can be split many, many ways. There's a way to divide them that all call good and evil. There's what's called a value stream, where your profit is aligned to making something the customers like more, and they're saying thank you with their dollars. Thank you so much for improving this part, improving this service. And there's what's called a waste stream, where you're withholding value in exchange for profit, which would be closer to, as I understood the example, of frequent part sharing to increase profit in Mercedes-Benz parts department and parts division. The solution to that is known stable interfaces. If we have binary libraries, web services, mice plugging into computers, and they all use different connectors every single week. Oh, that's not a USB mouse anymore. It's a USB-C mouse. Thank you very much. Then you have to invest in new contracts, and it's expensive to change. If the interfaces are known stable, we have a rapid pace of innovation that's cheap within that module boundary. We still have all the same costs when we change interface. But most of our innovative changes can happen on either side of the interface and in parallel. That's the premises of MSOA, or microservice-oriented architecture, which are currently the most close to human brain thinking computer programs we have now, and that's how most stock market predictive algorithms are run. So it's the coolest thing happening in software as a service right now is MSOA, and it uses that, known stable interfaces, and then an independently evolving ecosystem of services on either side. If Mercedes-Benz were to have known stable interfaces where they say this is a water pump, it will always connect to our engine block this way, then they could have 100 different SKUs, and that would be just fine, because now they're hot swappable. Now you have an IT department with buckets of different mice, trackballs, and keyboards, but they're all USB or they're all Bluetooth. They have a known stable interface. That's what changes a waste stream to a value stream. And we're profiting based on people saying thank you versus people saying, I don't want your upgrade, it blows up my supply chain, Autodesk. Well, I mean, it's a piece of data, and you can see I'm passionate about that one. But, thanks for entertaining my tirade. Did I get even near your point, or did I get so on a high horse I missed it entirely? Did it come to where you wanted, though? Okay, go team. Do I have questions? Time for any other questions?
I think might have time for one last question. One last one. Anyone? Going once? Oh, there you go. Greg's got a question up here. So can you bring the microphone up? Don't throw it, Ravi. That would hurt.
Hi, great talk, fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Question, we're sort of reinventing this thing from the design perspective, and it's so bizarre to hear that the same thing is happening in manufacturing.
Oh, you're doing it!
It's totally awesome. I love it. Do you have any insights from your angle onto the design of it, the user interface or the final interface part?
Oh, totally. I'd love to, in brief, share what I'm seeing related to design, and I wonder how much of it will overlap what you've already created, because I'm curious about it. By the way, everybody here, please LinkedIn me so I can cheer you on as you become Chief Agile Officer in your current companies. Yeah, let's do that. Greg, in design, the fastest Scrum team I was on ever started with design as a separate silo, and they had a number of failed sprints from dev's point of view, saying the stories weren't design ready when we pulled them, and design didn't become stable before the start of the sprint. That's why we were failing. So step one, they said, make sure design is ready for the story to be considered for sprint planning, and we won't pull the story if not. And that worked, but it's slow, because now we have design as a separate timeline and then development timeline, and we don't have an iterative learning cycle, right? So it was suboptimal, but it was step one. Then design opted, with plenty of encouragement from the then dev team, to join the Scrum team. And they said, no, a story's definition of ready is more broad now. Product owner, it's just when you can clearly articulate it and its business value. Then a designer and a dev are going to pair program till it's done. Later, they made it design dev test would pair program till it was done. Later, the designer knew enough by pairing every week for, 24 sprints, 1 week sprints? It didn't take that long. This was less than a year. The designer could now write enough code to implement some features and test them. The tester could too, and so could the dev. Now, the dev could never draw as pretty as the designer. And the dev was never as deep thinking about QA as the trained QA. So I don't need to rob anyone from their deep discipline, but they could do it enough to get game-changing product out, and they became a fully cross-functional team. So the coolest I've seen to date for design is design dev test. Actually, I've seen one cooler at a different company. It was design dev test deploy, and they aggressively paired and eventually grew cross-functionality. Now, the designer was still, and there were multiple designers in that team, there were 3, were so good that it's not that anyone else suddenly became superior at design. And they would still do like a community of practice. They would talk to everyone else about design, but they became more of a mentor than the one bottleneck for design. And it took time to grow there, but it was less than a year because they were on 1 week sprints. Is that similar to what you're doing already? Please make a LinkedIn post about what you're trying so we can all learn as a community. And folks, I'd like to say, here's me, I'm Joe Justice. You can tweet me at Wikispeed, my hobby car company, or you can tweet all of Scrum Inc. at Scrum Inc. and say, Joe said this, is that true? And people can give a counter opinion. If there's questions that arise later, you can email me. justice@scruminc.com or info@scruminc.com. I'm lucky enough to be teaching a 2-day certified Scrum Master class with hardware and merger and acquisition and finance and HR and software examples and pharma and biomedical here in San Francisco. That's Monday, Tuesday. Then the next one is October 29th, then November 12th, December 10th, and then I do a Train the Trainer course. How do you go from being a Scrum trainer or Scrum coach, primarily for software teams, to working with hardware teams? That's in February, and the data is all on scruminc.com. Any class that's in Seattle, we build a car as part of the class. So not only would you have practiced doing Scrum, but you'll say, no, I've done it in hardware. We did it in a sprint. I've done high performance carbon fiber layup. I've done aluminum machining, milling and certification. And we're able to do it in about 10 minutes when the majority of the class is Scrum content, it really flows quickly and you'll have a blast. And then we drive the car out at the other end. The class in October, we're renting a racetrack that Saturday, so the demo should be pretty good. Stacy, thank you so much for having me. Oh.